Today we're going to talk about how to plug trig into your calculator. Some of these are very basic, some of them have a little bit of a twist to it, so you need to pay close attention and make sure you follow everything we do. So I'm going to pull up the calculator so we can see it and just clear out what we have. And the first three are just, as basic as can be. You just plug it in. So first, actually, you should make sure your mode is in degree. So see, this one's in radian, and we need it in degree. So just go highlight degree, hit enter, and then it's in degree mode, and you can hit quit. Go back to your main screen. Okay, so that's one important thing, is to make sure your mode is correct, either degree or radian, depending on what you're plugging in. All these you see right now, we're plugging in degree. So just type in sine of 72 and hit enter. You get 0.951. Tell you what, let me see if I can shrink this so it won't, oh, that's not going to work. Oh well, we'll just leave it the way it is. Alright, and let's see, the calculator again. Alright, we do cosine of 43 degrees. That gives us 0.731. Next we have tangent of 115 degrees. We get negative 2.144 or 2.145. So yes, it is possible to get negatives. That does not mean you've done anything wrong necessarily. It is possible to get negatives. Okay, so hopefully those three are real basic for you. You can still see how I plugged them all in. Sine of 72, cosine of 43, tangent of 115. Piece of cake. Now the next three get a little trickier because the calculator doesn't have a cosecant button or a secant button or a cotangent button. So this is where you have to remember how these things relate to each other. Cosecant is just the opposite of sine, so it's 1 over sine. So to plug in cosecant of 37 degrees, I would do 1 over sine of 37 degrees. And that gives me 1.662. I'm rounding to the third decimal place. So 1.662. Okay, and then secant is the opposite of cosine. So you've got to remember which one's opposite of which. So instead of plugging in secant of 29, I plug in 1 over cosine of 29, and that's the same thing. So we get 1.143. And finally, cotangent is the opposite of tangent, so we do 1 over tangent of 12 degrees. And we get 4.705. Okay, so that's just the basic run through. If it's sine, cosine, or tangent, it's just very straightforward. You just plug it in exactly as is. If it's cosecant, secant, or cotangent, you must remember what they're related to. Cosecant is the same as 1 over sine, secant is 1 over cosine, and cotangent is 1 over tangent. Okay, so that's all in degrees. Let's practice a couple of them in radians now. The process is not any different, except that you have to go back and change your mode. So I'm going to clear what we have, go to the mode, change it to radian. Just hit enter when it's highlighted, and then hit quit. So I still do it the same way, just have it in different mode now. So sine of 2 pi over 3. And I get 0.866. Okay, and then I get tangent. Actually, let me go ahead and write that before I forget it. Sine's 0.866. Okay. Tangent of 7 pi over 6 gives us 0.577. Okay, and then we get to secant. Okay, so remember, what is secant? Secant is 1 over cosine. So I do 1 over cosine of 3 pi over 2. I plugged that in wrong. Give me just a second. Fix that. Here we go. Pi. Okay. Okay. So sometimes you might get an error. Let's check something out here. If I'm not mistaken, cosine of 3 pi over 2 is going to be 0. Clear that, sorry. cosine of 3 pi over 2. Okay, it is in fact 0, so 1 over that is not going to work, so this one does not exist, or undefined would be another way you could say it. D&E is just short for does not exist. So if you ever get an error, it says divide by 0, means it does not exist. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 does, it's 0, but 1 over 0 is undefined, so we can't do the secant there. Alright, cotangent is, remember, 1 over tangent of 11 pi over 8. We get 0.414. Okay, so that's how we plug in if we have the angle, because if you look back, all these are angles. If you look here, sine of 72 degrees was the angle. Cosine of 43 degrees was the angle. Or right here, 2 pi over 3 was the angle we just found the sine of. 7 pi over 6 was the angle we found the tangent of, and so on. One other thing your calculator can do is do the kind of the opposite. Okay, on the first examples we had, let me look back actually, make sure you understand what I'm saying. We had the angle, and we used that to find the sine of that angle. Okay? In other words, we had the angle, and we found the opposite over hypotenuse. What's happening on this next page is the opposite. We have the sine already, we have the relationship between the sides, but we don't know the angle. Okay? So our calculator is also able to solve this for us. And here's how. I want you to think for a second about how we normally solve equations. Let's say we have 3x equals 6. Okay, if you're solving for x, then you divide both sides by 3. And the reason you do that is because you were originally multiplying by 3. We had 3 times 3 times x. So to get rid of that 3, we had to do the opposite. We had to divide. Okay, or if I had x minus 2 equals 4. Right now I'm subtracting 2, so to get rid of it I have to add 2. So I get x equals 6. Or if I had the x squared equals 3. Let's do 9, so it's a nice number. X squared equals 9. Well, to get rid of the squared, we do the opposite, which is the square root. So we get x equals plus or minus 3. Okay, so when we're solving equations, we always do the opposite thing in order to simplify, or to get rid of something. So there is something that's opposite of sine. It's actually not cosecant. I'm not talking about the opposite, meaning like 1 over. I'm talking about like the inverse. And that is a button in your calculator that looks like this, sine to the negative 1. This is also called arcsin. So you take the arcsin of both sides. Okay, let me erase this. We don't need it anymore. And what happens is arcsin cancels out sine. So over here, on this side, they cancel each other out, and you just get theta equals sine to the negative 1 of 0.35. So now we can go to our calculator and plug that in. So if you notice, it's a little blue, written in blue on this calculator just above the sine. It says sine to the negative 1. So I have to hit secant, sine, and it gives me sine to the negative 1. So it's 0.35, and I get 0.358 for my answer. Okay, so for cosine, I need to take the inverse cosine of both sides, or arc cosine. So I'll go to my calculator and do secant cosine of 0.791. And I get 0.658. Okay, and then finally on this last one, we need to do the secant tangent. Okay, so if you want to, you can kind of skip excuse me, this line right here. You don't really need to write this if you don't want to, because it's just going to always cancel it out. So one way we could do it is just come down here, do secant tangent or arctangent of both sides, and it gives us this. Okay, and then we'll plug that in our calculator. second tangent of 0.5273, and we get 0.485. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of how these are done. If you need more practice, then you can look in your book in section 5.2, and some problems you could use to practice would be on page 467, numbers 39 to 48, and 55 to 62.